Now, we've been focusing over here on this other category, which are kind of like the outcasts forms. They're kind of like the loners, because they don't really fit in any of the groups, but they're still important, and that's why they're in this drop down. This time, however, we're looking at the statement form, which is under the customers area. The reason we're talking about it kind of in this section is because it used to be over here in the other area, and this is one of the things that we kind of have to get used to when we're using QuickBooks Online, and that is that whatever the developers might move things around, and one day you might just go into it and say, the statements are now in another place. And that's okay. As long as we can find them, the functionality will still be usually in essence the same, because the objectives of accounting haven't really changed, right? The double entry accounting system is what it is. We've got to communicate with vendors, customers, employees, do our taxes. That's all the same stuff. But the look and feel where they put stuff, the developers will move that around all the time. I think mainly to justify their paycheck because, they got to do something, right? But in any case, that's where it's at this time. We're looking at that statement form. Now, the statement form is a little bit different than the other forms. Although it fits in the normal accounting cycle, in the revenue cycle, it doesn't actually record anything. So in that sense, you can think of it as basically similar to like an estimate type form where we have an estimate before we make the invoice, or we can think of it similar to the purchase order that we talked about before, which is a request for inventory, but we send the request out before we pay for the inventory or receive the inventory, and therefore nothing is actually being recorded, although we still want to track those forms. And then the statement form is attached to the receivable cycle. It's only going to be used if you're in a revenue cycle that has accounts receivable, which once again will be driven by the industry typically. In other words, if you're in gig work, you're just getting paid by YouTube or something like that. It's not likely that you're going to have to send out statements to like Google to try to get a receipt of the payment because you're not invoicing them. If you work at a cash register at like a food truck or in a restaurant where you get paid at the same point in time, you're not going to have any accounts receivable. You're not going to have to worry about that whole collection process. You got a bunch of other things to worry about. You don't want someone slipping on the floor and then suing you. If you're in California, it's going to happen, obviously. But you're going to have to, those things you definitely have to worry about. You probably want to move if that's the case, if you're over here. But any case, fires, that's something to worry about. You can't even get insurance for that kind of thing these days, apparently around here. But in any case, but if you have to invoice the client, such as if you're in a CPA firm or if you're in a law firm or landscaping, then you do the work first and you invoice the clients, meaning you have to track the accounts receivable. So that means that you're going to have to want to follow up on the accounts receivable from time to time and say, hey, we would like to get paid over here. And to do that, you could resend out the invoices and say, look, the invoice is overdue. I'm going to resend it out. Or you can send out the statements. Now, the statements are great because possibly you have some people that have multiple invoices that they haven't yet paid you on. That means that the statement can kind of combine them together. Instead of sending two individual invoices, you can send one statement summarizing the total bill that is due at this time. You can also create the statements all at one time, making it part of your normal routine. Possibly every week or every 2 weeks or so on, you send out the statements to either invoices that are outstanding or possibly just for the invoices that are overdue. So just a quick reminder on the invoice. If we go into an invoice here, we note that the invoice is going to be requesting payment for work that has been done. So we'd put the work that's been done. We're going to put the invoice date. That's the date that we send out the invoice, which usually is pretty close to the date we do the work, but most likely sometime after the date we do the work. That's when the revenue is recorded. And then we're going to have the due date, which might be dependent on our terms. So the default terms is usually like 30 days, meaning if I send out the invoice today, I expect you to pay me within 30 days. And if they don't pay you within 30 days, then we're going to hopefully keep on asking for the money, right? So that means that this due date is going to be the critical date, which will be dependent upon the number of days that we have on our terms. And then anything that's overdue, we might want to, of course, send our statements for reminders for overdue items. All right, so let's close this out. Once we send out the invoices to communicate with our customers, we'll just recall are typically over here in the sales tab, which might be called the customer center in the old lingo. If I close up the ham boogie, you can remember up top we have the all sales items, which allows us to sort for all of the forms under, in essence, the customer section. And so we can search for the forms under here, which would be the invoices typically, and we can look for the outstanding invoices. And of course, within here, we could say, okay, they're outstanding. We can also search for the overdue invoices. And then I can go over here and say, if either we receive payment, or if I hit the drop down, I see that I have within my options to send a reminder. So we can send a reminder, in essence, sending the invoice again. And we might be able to do that with like a batch action. So if I can select multiple of these items, hit the drop down and send it out, or send a reminder. So that's great because you can go in here and kind of send that reminder out. That's not exactly the same thing as the statements, which will give you a summary. One reason the statements might be a little bit easier is because you might be able to kind of automate, when the statements are going to go out, possibly just sending them out periodically to invoices that are outstanding, or possibly just to the invoices that are overdue, maybe more automating the system. And also you can send out invoices to those clients that have multiple invoices outstanding. So it might be confusing if they have like 5 invoices that they owe you on, to send them 5 different reminders. Might be better to send them a summary of all those reminders in one, which is basically what the statements possibly can do. So we can also find that if we go to the invoices tab, we have the same kind of filtering options that we talked about in prior presentations. Maybe this time we look at the overdue invoices, and once again within here you have your same options, and you can send reminders and so on. You can select multiple reminders to do a batch action to send those reminders. Or we can go to the customer area over here, and we can say that we want to look at possibly the overdue invoices or the open invoices. Let's go with the overdue invoices, and you'll note that we have, for example, this client that has 2 of the overdue invoices. That's where, again, the statements might be more appropriate, as they will basically combine everything that's going to be due within to a statement. So that's what we would typically do. And most likely, if you have to deal with accounts receivable, you would like to automate the statements in some way, shape, or form, so that you can basically automatically send out possibly the statement reminders to try to collect on the invoices, possibly every week or every 2 weeks, either for outstanding invoices or possibly for the overdue invoices. So notice that the plus button is over here now. That's the same plus button that's over here when I close the ham boogie. Plus button populates over here. That's the current layout of the system. That might change. That's one of the things that they could change, that other plus button's always there. So let's go down here into the statements and check them out. So we have the statement date, which is typically going to be the current date. We've got the statement type. So we have the drop down on the statement type. Now the balance forward is typically going to be the default. Open items in the last 365 days. So that might be an option that we could choose instead of the balance forward. The transaction statement might give us more information about the detail of the transactions, remembering that these statements are usually going to be summaries, possibly not combining all the information on the invoice. Remembering that if you're in an invoice for like a construction company, for example, one invoice could be quite long, listing out all the things that were in the bill, in the invoice that was sent out. So possibly in the statement, we might not want to recap all of the information that might be on a very long invoice or multiple long invoices, but rather we want to say, hey, look, this invoice went out. If you want the invoice again, we'll send you the invoice, but this is how much you owe us based on the invoices we have sent out, in the past, would be the general idea, here. All right, so then we're going to say the one that we have all of them, or we have the open items or the overdue. Now, clearly, usually, you're going to be sending them out, not to the ones that are closed. We're not going to send statements out typically to people that already paid us. We're looking for the invoices that are open, but also you might have a system where you're going to say, hey, look, I'm going to wait till the 30 days happen without hassling them and then send them the overdue invoices. You can imagine it either way, meaning, for example, if you send out your invoice and you have a fairly slow turnaround, like it's going to be due, a very low turnaround period, like 10 to 15 days, then you might not want to hassle them within the 10 to 15 days of payment, and then you're only going to hassle them after they don't pay you, right? But if you have a longer pay period, maybe 30 days or like 60 days, then you might say, hey, look, I'll give you 60 days to pay me, but I'm still going to remind you every 2 weeks as my normal reminder. So whether it's overdue or not, I'll send them out a reminder saying, hey, look, you still owe us this money just in case you didn't know. So you can think about either way as might be as a way you might go.